So one of the first things we suggest that you do is to get a sense of where you are now. Now, some of you may not have finished your pledge drive yet, and some of you may and have fallen short, and that's one of the reasons that you've signed on. But it's a good idea to just go over the information that you have and try and get a sense of what are the dynamics. Have you lost major donors? That's usually an easy one to identify, and that's something a lot of our congregations are struggling with, that some of these larger donors have died or have moved away. Do you feel like folks are holding back over anxiety about larger events, saying that they're making new outside financial commitments, etc.? Is it because of transitions in your congregation, perhaps, or conflict in the congregation? Those are also times when sometimes pledge drives fall short. If it is because of conflict or problems with transition, we hope your minister or board president will be in touch with your primary contact on staff about that. Maybe you tried an extremely bold budget. Good for you. And yet things fell short. So that's a possibility. Or there may be other things going on. It's a good idea before you start developing what your message is and your strategies to have a sense of what's going on. And later, if we haven't paired strategies with kind of what's going on in your congregation, feel free to write about that in the chat, and we will try and pinpoint strategies that might specifically work depending on those dynamics in your congregation. So we want to talk next about framing your message, and Kay's going to begin that.
So the reason why I chose the opening words about acknowledging the good that you already have in your life or in your congregation is the foundation for all abundance, is that if you've heard us talk before, or if you've heard other people frame it this way, framing what you want to do in your congregation as an opportunity and what you can accomplish rather than a scarcity is the best way to go. And people don't want to typically frame, fund a sinking ship, so to speak. So that's why we want to have an abundance frame be how you package what you'd like people to give to. So to give an example, sometimes congregations say, well, if we don't get the money that for our budgetary goal, we'll have to reduce salaries for our staff without this money, or we won't be able to afford our office administrator without this money. If you frame it in an abundance context, with your increased pledges and gifts, we'll be able to sustain our current mission and programs, or allocate staff time to better serve congregants and newcomers, or our minister will be able to do more outreach in the community. So we know that you're not always adding things to the budget, and that sometimes you're just trying to sustain a current budget. But it's still important to talk about what the budget is accomplishing. And so why do we have staff? Why do we have a minister? Why do we have an office administrator? Why do we have a DRE or an LRE? We have those so we can live out the mission and vision of our congregation. So framing it in that context rather than we're paying the salaries of somebody else is a great way to go. Of course, we want to be fair and compassionate in our compensation, and so it's fine to talk about that as well. But if you can make sure that you are talking about it with a positive frame, that will help people feel better about digging a little deeper to get you where you want to go on your budget. And you want to also make sure that your leadership is on board. And I know, Jan, you wanted to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and just that I think it is important before you rush into strategies to have everybody on board with what is that message, and that it's a succinct message. What's going on? What are some of the dynamics? Why you are where you are? But leadership also knows what the mission and vision are and how to articulate this in a positive way. Then you choose your strategy. And some of these I know we said they're creative, but some of them are probably not all that creative. But they're, in a number of cases, tried and true. And people have had some success with these, and we hope you will too. One is we just want to offer some general ideas and for you to consider, and you will need to consider those obviously based on your congregation's situation, history, and culture. Some of the things we suggest, you might think that would never go in our congregation, and maybe it would not. Although maybe if you had an additional conversation with me at some time, we could strategize about that. If possible, emphasize increased pledges over one-time gifts. It's very tempting to say, if everyone would just make a one-time gift of this amount, we'd be able to close this budget up. But then you're going to be asking probably again for one-time gifts. And people start thinking, well, they're always going to ask for a one-time gift. And so I'll hold back a little on my pledge so I can give something to the one-time gift, etc. If you're getting people to raise their pledges, most people are very reluctant to lower their pledge. They do that, advisedly. And so once someone's raised their pledge, you've got a better path to sustainability on your budget. So anything you're doing now, any kind of special catch-up, much better if you can get pledge increases over gifts. The other thing is to try and involve a lot of people in the ask. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we're talking about strategies. But particularly look for people who are stretch givers, who aren't necessarily the people with the most money in the congregation, but are really taking seriously giving a large percentage of their income to the congregation. Or they give so generously that it does make a difference in terms of how they live. And the choices that they've made. People who are articulate and also able to be positive about their message. So Kay, you were going to talk about matching gifts.
Yes, so a matching gift concept is probably something you're familiar with, but it's where one or more donors agree to give a certain amount if the rest of the congregation steps up and matches that amount. So I talked to a congregation last month who employed that strategy, and they were able to close their budget gap. And it's not a strategy that you want to use every year because, like anything, it can get worn out as an approach. But if you use it occasionally, it's a good way to go, and it can be an inspiring way for people to step up. So as an example, if you had a $20,000 budget shortfall and you had one or more donors, one or two or three donors that agreed to match up to $10,000, if the rest of the congregation would step up, then if that $10,000 is present as a potential match, then the rest of the congregation can come forward with that additional $10,000. And these matching gifts can be done on a variety of scales. They can be done, even for a $50,000 budget gap. Hopefully nobody's facing that, but it's possible. But they are usually a good way to have people feel like their dollars are going further, and they're also putting up some inspiration for the whoever's giving the match. It doesn't mean that their identity is revealed, but some people say, well, wow, if that person's really stepping up, I'm gonna contribute so that my dollars will go further. So that's a common approach that people use. Again, you don't want to use it every year, but that can be a frequent way to do things. And as Jan said earlier, if you have any questions about that approach as we're talking about each of these approaches, feel free to put it in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and we can talk about it.
The other thing, one of our congregations in Oregon last year had, I don't know if it was a single donor or multiple donors, who came up with a pot of $18,000. And they agreed to use that to match anyone who increased their pledge by $1,000 or more. Now that's pretty ambitious. But again, that can be a great way to match pledges rather than just gifts. so that you then are increasing your pledging base. The other thing is, a lot of our congregations, when it comes to this time of year, fall into drawing down reserves. And that's just how they are getting by, and perhaps have been getting by. And there's almost always angst about this. Feeling like that's not what it was there for, we shouldn't be doing this, we're got a budget, that's in the red, and that kind of thing. One way to perhaps get around some of that is to use that money, if it's going to be used, as the matching fund, so that people feel at least like it's not just going down a hole, but it's being used as an incentive to increase pledges, which will cause us to have less need to draw down those reserves or to use some sort of allocated money in a way that we're just going to keep doing that we see no end in sight.
All right, so another method that can be helpful, that's different than matching gifts, is to specifically just define either the per member or friend increase to fund the additional amount that you need. So this makes it seem more feasible and doable in many people's minds, and it spreads it across the entire congregation rather than solely relying on a major donor, say, that you would be doing for a matching gift strategy. And it provides the whole congregation the opportunity to step up and engage. So, for example, if you had 120 pledging households or 120 members, and you could decide whether you want to do it per household or per member, but if they each pledged $200 more this year, that would be an extra $24,000. So, it's mentioned to folks that if they can do more than that, that would be great. There will be some households that can do more than that amount, and some households that they're already stretching so much that they won't be able to do that. And so you can mention that as part of the whole picture, but that if you define it in those smaller terms and break it down, then it can be seem more feasible and spreads it across the entire congregation.
And in fact, even leading with that, rather than saying, so we have a $24,000 shortfall. The good news is we're only $200 more per household away from sustaining this, reaching our goal, and that kind of thing. And people can do the math, but it does seem like it's just kind of more doable when it's broken into that. Another thing you can do is to have a special offering for gifts. And it's kind of, some congregations have miracle Sundays, or you just have one day in which you're really going to lift up what the gift is. You may have people talking about that during the service, have a special offering time for the service, a special basket, or a time when people come forward and maybe offer a little testimonial to what went into their discernment. Have someone model that for them, or choose a few people in advance that are going to do that, who can come forward and do that. If you have lost substantial pledgers, I served our congregation in Ventura for 13 years, and we lost a very generous and very beloved member of the congregation. And one of the things we did on a Sunday, because I think his donation was about $26,000 a year, and he left over $400,000 to the church. So we could have just said, well, hey, he's just paid his pledge off in advance. But we didn't want to do that with the money, and we wanted to be more intentional about his legacy. And we had a Sunday in which we invited people to make an adjustment to their pledge in Tom's memory and in his honor. And so it was very specific to living out that legacy and beginning to pay forward some of what we had gotten from him. And that was also a very successful way to tie it. It had a face, it had a legacy, it was honoring Tom's legacy, but also beginning to live our own legacy out in new and wonderful ways, that we might be those generous people that would be noted in the future. The other thing we've talked about is being a little more intentional, and some of you, I think, have been doing that this year and in recent years, being a little more intentional about the role of giving among non-members. A lot of our congregations have seen a huge increase in participants, people who come. Some congregations have started categories of pledging friends, and giving people opportunities who are not joining to still be in a category of friend and a pledging friend, and really emphasize how important they are to us, and how much, and kind of getting the word out to them sometimes about how much it costs per member and pledging friend to sustain the services that we're offering. And then, of course, another way, and sometimes this is the fastest way. I think if you're not muted, if you would mute, we're hearing some here, actually, I can mute, is to simply go to certain donors and ask them to meet the budget shortfall. And in that case, I think you really do want to be talking about the possibilities of recognition, the legacy, and that kind of thing. That's another option. I would not go to that one first. And then, Kay, you were going to talk about our last point there under strategies.
Right. So another way to do things is to send either a paper letter through the regular mail or an email to all members and friends, or you can post something on your Facebook page. It depends on what sort of social media that you use, outlining what you can accomplish together and what funds that you need. And again, focusing on how it relates to your shared mission and values, and framing it in that way rather than in a scarcity mode is important. So those types of methods that are either electronic or paper versus in person are typically less, they will bring you lower results than an in-person ask, either during a church service or at some other church event, but they're still worth doing, certainly, and especially as a follow-up method for folks that either haven't been coming or weren't able to be there on the Sunday that you did it. So at any rate, that's another way to do it. But again, that's sort of, I wouldn't say a last resort, but that's the least effective of those methods, but still a way to do it. So we're going to talk a little bit about testimonials, and you can use them for any of the strategies that we talked to above, including the paper mailing or the email. But having a testimonial can be very powerful in terms of motivating people to dig a little deeper or pledge if they haven't been pledging, and have that person state why and what the church, why the church is important to them, what the church means to them, and ask others to join them in their support. That person giving the testimonial doesn't have to talk about their particular pledge amount, either in a percentage or dollar amount. They can just talk about why the church is meaningful to them. And I can think of several examples in my own congregation, and I've been a member of several over the years, UU congregations, where somebody stood up and talked about how meaningful and how important the church was to them. And it really had a big impact on the congregation, hearing what their gifts do. And, we all have an important mission in our churches of reaching out and being supportive to the wider community as well. But one of the important things that we do is provide support and love and community and all sorts of opportunities as people in our own congregations. And so hearing from them is great. And Jan, I know you had an example about one from your congregation that you wanted to share.
Right. One of the things we've talked about, and Kay and I favor testimonials year round, that on a regular basis, people are having a chance to say what this congregation has meant to them in very intentional ways. But sometimes having a financial demographic speaking to their own demographic. And maybe you have a small group meeting of some of your larger donors speaking to people or asking them to stretch. But we had a family in the Ventura congregation, a really struggling young family. They were raising a sibling, a couple of children. He was underemployed. And when it came time to pledge, they very intentionally as a family with little tiny children sat and talked about what they wanted to give to the church. And I think that they had talked about they weren't going to have Netflix, or they had a very specific thing they were going to give up to support their church community. And that kind of stretching just can speak volumes to people about their own choices that they're making, and to be very powerful. So we often go to those top money people in terms of donations, and sometimes that's not where the most powerful testimonials are.
And one thing that I wanted to add about it being in person is you can also do one by video, and you can have 3 or 4 testimonials in a short little tight video. And it really depends on whether you have the resources, both in terms of the filming and the editing, to do that. But if you do, and there's usually lots of tech savvy people in congregations, you can have that shown during the service as well. And you might be able to attract some people who would really feel less able to get up in front of the whole congregation, but might feel more willing to do it if they're filmed in a quiet setting, just talking about what's meaningful to them about your congregation, and share a meaningful event. So that's another way that you can get the information in front of the congregation, and perhaps stretch your pool of people who might be willing to talk if it feels like too much to get up and talk in front of the congregation.
And doing a video with your children, or your youth, or by your children and youth, could be a good way to do it. We just wanted to also mention briefly recognition, and that sometimes we're reluctant to recognize people by name, or to be recognized by name, but to have opportunities to do that, whether you've got a poster board where people have signed on, I've increased my pledge, or even, they can say anonymous, but I've increased my pledge, that people are seeing them, the increases as they come in, and maybe even something that says, what's something that you most get out of this congregation, something that they can write in there, and some written testimonial that's in the fellowship hall. And again, that it's okay for them to put anonymous if they want, but they can still put their pledge increase or their gift amount and what's motivating it.
And one of the things that I wanted to emphasize is that don't be shy about it in that context. And again, we want to give the people the opportunity to be anonymous if they want. But many of us in our congregations donate to the local food bank, or the local mental health clinic, or the local public radio station. And mine in Eugene, for example, broadcast the names, with permission, of course, of the people who support that station. And so, if they say, Jan Christian is a proud supporter of KLCC, or, whoever the name is, I just want to encourage us to feel like we can have that same sort of support and be open about it in our own congregations. And I know people are mindful of the economic diversity that exists in our congregations, but be proud of the fact that you're supporting your congregation at whatever level, whether it's you're on the low end of the economic spectrum or the high end. These recognition boards don't have to say what the people's pledge amounts are. It could say that, I've pledged this year, or this is the amount that I've increased my pledge, not monetarily, but by, 1% or whatever it is, that however you want to identify it. So just feel free to invite people to be proud about supporting the congregation, just as they are proud to support the food bank and be acknowledged for that, or the local public radio station, or the local mental health clinic, or the local Planned Parenthood, whatever it is.
Someone wrote to me privately in the chat that they had a problem with a match and that it just became a one-time gift problem anyway. Very few givers considered their match as an increased pledge. And I guess my question about that was whether or not you were asking for a match in the form of increased pledges. And then the next year they decreased it, or kind of what happened there, if you'd write me. So now that we've shared some strategies with you, we're happy to have questions. We're happy to have you share what's worked for you, and something that you've done in the past. Maybe you're reluctant to do it again because you've already done it, but it was successful, because we've got a lot more wisdom here together than any of us have alone. So if you do want to jump in with a question, you can put it in the chat, or you can unmute yourself at the lower left-hand part of your screen. Run your cursor over that bottom part of your screen. The microphone will show up. You can unmute yourself and tell us something to inspire us, or ask a question, or come up with some idea that came to you while we were talking.
Something that we've been talking about at Granite Peak this year is whether or not we can give another $1 each day to the congregation, and what might be exchanged for that, so as to encourage people to consider for some people it might be a 10% increase, for some people it might be a 5% increase, and others a 20% increase. But it was just, is there a way that you can save another $1 a day that could help us to match the percentage increase in pledges to the percentage increase in the budget?
I love it. And $365 times however many your number of members you have, that's a big chunk of money. And I love breaking it down like that. And people can get very creative. I'm getting weather stripping. In the winter, whatever it is that I'm doing. I'm doing a side job that's going to bring in money. I like that. I like the kind of creativity that it frees up, and everybody supporting one another, and breaking it down into really what for many people in our congregations would be very manageable and probably not make much of a difference to them, but a huge amount of difference to the congregation. I think that's great. What else are you doing out there?
This is Deanna at Boulder Valley. I just have a question in regards to how, if you make a pledge. I remember being a kid and getting a special envelope to put my pledge in, and that was such a big deal to me as a 12-year-old or whatever. And I'm just wondering, if you have a lot of asks throughout the year, how does making a pledge be special, I guess? So, and I don't know if there's any right or an answer about that, except that it seems like if the congregation is always asking for money, and then it kind of takes the what is it, out of the sales for the pledge drive or something. So is there?
Oh, you just muted. You
oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I have a very touchy screen. I'm just wondering if there's a way to, let me think, like a year-round giving, I guess maybe is what I'm thinking. Or I know a lot of churches just do an annual pledge drive, but then there's always these asks in between. So
let me get clear on your question. And unmute again. Help me get clear about your question.
Well, I don't even know if it's a question as much as it is just a thought about how, just the thought that if they're asking throughout the year for money, you know, how can the pledge drive be something that is special if the congregation is always going to go, well, in 3 months they're going to ask me for more money, so I won't increase my pledge, like you were saying earlier. I don't know what the spirit of that is, but and is there something around year-round pledging that will change the pledge drive from annual to year-round?
Well, and I'm happy at some point offline to talk about year-round pledging. That's typically that you're not all asking everyone at once a year. You're asking 1/12 of the group in January, 1/12 in February, you know, that kind of thing. That is a little different. In the chat we have, what do you think about pledging levels or circles with minimum giving amounts? When I was a member at my first UU congregation, I increased my pledge twice to get to the next level. Yay. Kay, you want to talk about that?
Sure. I was actually thinking about just doing a little tap on for Boulder Valley, just about the difference, in addition to what you said about year-round pledging, which is really a different ball game. I think you can make the annual budget drive, if it's a one-time thing, you know, usually it's 1 month with 2 months of follow-up in the year. Make that be that this is really the big time that we're giving our biggest financial contribution to fund our mission and vision. So it's a much different animal, in my view, than what you're going to do when you're buying something at the church auction or you're doing something else at another church fundraiser during the year. Some churches, for their fundraisers, have that money go to a dedicated project. You know, it's going to fund a particular piece of social justice, or it's going to fund a particular adult education series or something like that. You know, it's going to fund a trip for all the youth to go to a special conference, something like that. And the annual budget drive is a much bigger thing, in my view, and should be framed in that way, and that this is how we are living out our mission and vision and as congregants. So I think framing that one in a broader, bigger way that's really mission and vision focused is important. So I just wanted to tap that on there. So to get to the other question here, so what do you think about pledging levels or circles with minimum giving amounts? So just so that I understand what that means, I mean, you're talking about identifying people that say, you know, Kay and Jan are in the silver section or whatever that is. Is that correct?
I don't know that you'd actually have to identify people. You could just establish these circles, which was done at my first UU congregation, and you put yourself in them by the amount you gave without an announcement of who you are.
Right. I see. So, right. So it's a chart, basically, and then you're finding yourself on the chart.
And it could say, which really fits into some of the things Kay and I have talked about in other webinars about, you would know how many people are in that circle, whether you knew their names or not. Yes. Right.
And I think it's really important in a pledge drive brochure, or however you're advertising your pledge drive in the materials. I think it works really well to have a gifts or a pledges table. So sometimes they're called gifts tables just because that's the generic fundraising term, but having a pledging table so that people can see, that there's 10 households in the congregation that are pledging between $10,000 and $15,000 a year, for example. I'm just pulling that number out of the air, but I certainly go to congregations where there's higher pledging amounts, and there's 5 people in the 15 to 20,000 or 15 to 25,000, whatever that is. So people can say, wow, there's people there that are really stepping up. And when you have that type of a chart that's either on display in your lobby on a poster board, or it is in your written materials, or both, that you ask people to see if they can think about moving up a level. And that's a good way to, you illustrated that that's what you increased your pledge to get to the next level. So I think that can be very, very compelling. I think sometimes people have no idea what the overall amount it is that it takes to run the congregation. There's usually a small number of people involved in kind of running the finances of the church. And for them to see that somebody is giving that much can be very inspiring. And related to that, if somebody gets up, no matter what their financial status is, and talks about the percentage of what they're giving, whether if it's 10% and 5% to the church and 5% to their other causes or whatever that is, that can be inspiring as well. But I like the idea of you can name them whatever you want to name them. And sometimes people name them something, creative that relates to something related to the mission and vision. But that can be a very useful tool. And I definitely encourage congregations to do that. And then sometimes you can even use that table if you're doing face-to-face visits and say, we would love it if you could move up a level, like ask specifically during that, or say, I'm in this range and I know that you're in this range too. Can you join me in moving up a level? And that's a very specific type of an ask, that you would want to organize in advance. But
right. Excellent. Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up. Someone has asked, Catherine has asked, I'm wondering what are some of the ways people celebrate and provide recognition for donors? People want to jump in there if you've done something you feel particularly good about.
So I can pipe in while people are thinking about it. If you want some of the things that I've seen at a variety of congregations, some people have a tree, for example, and they put a leaf on the tree with the name of households that have pledged. And sometimes they do that, say, for example, for an endowment, but also sometimes people do it in a more temporary fashion for an annual budget drive. And so people go and look and, find their leaf, or you can have a plaque if it's a building project, for example. I know that we're talking about annual budget drives today, but I know that, for example, right now that you have something up in Lafayette, since I was just there for your annual budget drive, even though I was working on a different project when I was there, and they have a thermometer-like thing, but it's a dry erase, so they can keep increasing and adding things and adding notations to it. So that doesn't have specific donors' names on it, but I've certainly seen it where they do put specific donors' names on leaves or bricks or some sort of building type material. Again, it doesn't have to relate to a building. It can just be building towards your goal of your annual budget drive. And sometimes people even ask the congregation to write their name on one and stick it up there themselves, so it's more intentional.
Right.
I've also had, donors be recognized for particular things. I've seen it in some congregations where people are asked to stand up when they've already turned in their pledge card, or as part of the pledge process, they get up and walk forward and put their pledge card in a basket as an intentional act. So there's a variety of ways to do it. And, you have to see what works well for your congregation.
I like the idea when you're talking about the tree, and I know I was just at the Fresno congregation, and they've got a beautiful piece of art on their wall that has a tree that is listing people's pledges. I kind of like the idea of turning over a new leaf, with trees, and maybe you do something that really honors people who have made a stretch pledge or who've increased their pledge, or, things like that. I think that's fun. A lot of places do parties and do lunches and have people turn their pledges in then and announce what you got. We're kind of getting more into the kind of general pledge drive conversation now. And I would point out that I know some of you have been in on previous webinars. This is just more of an informal conversation, but our Pacific Western region archives our webinars. And if you do a Google search for PWR archived webinars, you will come up with that page. And we have a number of webinars on topics related to stewardship and all other kinds of things. And some of them are about pledge drives. Some of them are about just ways to change the culture in congregations to be more generous. Some of them are strategies for smaller congregations. Some of them talk about creating stewardship teams and 3-year themes and that kind of thing. So I I refer you to that. Deanna says, name badge ribbon saying we pledged. Yes,
Great.
that's great.
We actually listed everybody who had pledged about the week before the end of the pledge drive. And it was amazing how many people came out after that and because they didn't want to be off the list the next time. And we missed a couple of people for technical reasons, which they came back to us immediately. So clearly it was something that people were paying attention to and they responded to. So that was
That's great.
cool.
That's great. How many of you, if you've got your video on, raise your hand if your pledge drive for this year is about done. Okay. It's kind of half and half. All right. Anything else in terms of questions or ideas or things you would like for us to talk about a little bit more? I'm getting some music here.
Somebody has some music out in the background, creative. Susan Dixon, maybe. I think you look like you're the only one that is
Yeah,
not muted.
and for some reason I'm unable to mute. So Susan, if you can hear this and mute yourself by clicking on the microphone on the left-hand part of your screen as you run your cursor down there, I'd appreciate it. Although it did get kind of quiet. Did someone just unmute to ask a question? Or we're not required to sit in silence till 7:45. But oh, wow. Okay, someone was busy here. This year, we asked people to choose their level of commitment prior to pledging. Supporter. Congregation is a significant part of my life and promotes my spiritual growth. Sustainer. Congregation is central to my identity and I want to sustain its programs. Visionary. Congregation uniquely represents my spiritual principles. Transformer. I'm deeply committed to this congregation. My gift fuels transformation and how I live out my UU principles. We then talk about the UUA suggested fair share giving levels that include levels for these categories of commitment for a spectrum of adjusted annual income. Some people can match their level of commitment with their giving level. Others cannot, but they may volunteer often or serve the congregation in other ways. Recognition strategy. We start our pledge campaign with a major givers gathering that recognizes people for their level of giving at a special event. So Marianne, thanks for mentioning the UUA suggested fair share giving levels. We, if you're not familiar with that, we do talk about that in almost every webinar, and we like it. And we've got a lot of congregations who have used that very successfully and who've had some resistance, and it's scary and all of that, but it can lead to some great conversations. So Elizabeth said we had 64 pledge units that increased their pledge, but 18 that decreased, including a large donor who had changes because of retirement.
I wanted to say, I didn't want to send it. I wanted to write more.
Okay. All right, you can write more. You can just tell us.
Something. So we stay at about the same amount.
I'm having a little trouble hearing you. Are other people? And I'm wondering if you might just use your. Usually we talk about headphones and earbuds, but maybe try just your computer.
Maybe just get a little closer, Elizabeth, to your computer.
Can you hear me now?
Not great.
This, I'm not sure if that's.
Yes.
Perfect.
Can you hear me
That's
now?
it.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So we had increases and then some decreases, and we ended up staying at about the same amount. So we are not decreasing. We have a goal of a 5% increase, which we have not done, but we stayed about the same. And what I'm thinking is like 64 people or 64 pledged units came up with, you know, giving more, which is awesome and huge, and we should really acknowledge, I think, and thank them. But because of the 18 decreases, we cannot celebrate, you know, to be where we wanted to be. And the question is how to deal, like not to make this seem that we don't have enough, or that we I don't know how to deal with the decreases. And
do you want me to pipe in here, Jan, or
Please do.
Okay. So yeah, I think that you can, you know, be joyful to the congregation about these increases and still frame it in a positive way, and let them know where you're at. And you can still do an additional ask and see if people can help you get where you decided you want to go. I know in particular that you have done a lot of visioning work together, and you have a lot of things you're going to accomplish, and you have a lot of exciting things coming up. So talking about that and what that extra 5% is going to do, I think, you know, will be helpful. And then still acknowledging that, you know, 64 households stepped up to help us get where we're going, but some people had a change in circumstance, and so they had to decrease. And so we're still actually at the same level as last year. And here's what we had planned to do with this additional, you know, amount, the 5%. So I think that you can still frame it in a positive way, and, you know, tell the congregation about it. Because I think a lot of congregations do their pledge drive, they don't get what they want, but they don't really tell the congregation much about it until it comes time for the vote on the annual budget. And then by then it's not too late, because you can take a special offering there, but the annual budget meeting is typically a bit drier than, say, what you might have happen during a service, for example. So, you know, you could ask during a service, you know, report on it, and you could have it at the beginning of when you have your announcements, you know, so that it doesn't feel like it's impacting, you know, the spiritual nature of it. But I think you can still do it in a spiritual way. So that would be my suggestion, that you can still frame it in a positive way and really be effusive about the 64 households that increased, and then talk about what you can accomplish, you know, after you describe that you also had 18 households that had to decrease, and say, you know, what you want to accomplish and take a special offering.
Well, and I think I would say chose to decrease, or felt a need to decrease, rather than had to decrease.
Sure. Well, however, it sounds like a retirement is
we won't call them party poopers. But,
no. But
right.
if retirement, I'm not making excuses for people, but if retirement is a reason why, that often income goes down a lot. So for that particular donor, then that could be, they might have had to.
That's the only one I knew the reason for. And someone also asked if we're recording, and we are. I'm getting a little noise in the background here. I don't know what that's from. Marianne said, of course, when the pledge drive comes up short, the fundraising line item can always be increased with new fun ideas, including a Thanksgiving pastry auction, trivia night dinner, harvest supper, or Founders Day dinner, group sale, or service auction. Well, Marianne, you're just full of, that is, you are putting the fun in fundraising. I like it. And what we find very often in our congregations is, even though pledging can be this, you know, we seem to just have to fight for every dime sometimes. You hold an auction and walk away with $20,000 that people have in their pocket and we're able to come out with. So we do know, when we talk about abundance, that there is great abundance in our congregations. So I think those are really fun ideas.
Yeah, and I would just add too that whole community building piece is great, to the extent you can have something fun associated with your annual budget drive. That's always wonderful as well, a fun event. But part of why our auctions do so well is, you know, you've got lots of people offering dinners, for example, at their homes that have a particular theme, or I read one recently of a congregation that I was working with, Super Bowl night, you know, variety of different things that they do. And so, a big piece of why people give is when they feel really connected to the congregation. And so providing that opportunity to build more community and be together in community. especially in times when it seems like there's a lot of sort of grim news out there, is a great way to raise money for the congregation and still have a wonderful time.
I'm also wondering too if there's a way to kind of combine the pledge drive and dinners in a way, in terms of what about someone who didn't have, wasn't particularly going to be part of a matching fund, but was willing to host a dinner for everyone who raised their pledge, or anyone who, people who raised their pledge for over $500. That kind of thing, that it's a really great way of members being personal and thanking people and nurturing the abundance and the generosity, and not just dollar for dollar, or, we'll come wash the windows of anyone. I mean, there could be some fun, creative ideas about who's willing to provide, help or services or gifts or some kinds of things for people who raise their pledge. I think that could end up being a lot of fun and very creative, in the same way that a lot of our service auctions can be a lot of fun. It says, Elizabeth, when our pledge drive concluded, we spoke our gratitude from the pulpit. We thank the 17 households who increased, thank the households who remained steady, and thank the handful who decreased, recognizing that in changing circumstances, a continued commitment to the church was a powerful gift. We didn't call out anyone by name. That's beautiful. Yeah.
And I know some of you were on our previous call, but just to tag on to, if folks are feeling like they need to decrease because they say that they need to give more to the ACLU or Planned Parenthood, which we all know, well, I shouldn't say we all, many of us think do good work. I don't want to put everyone in the same category, but those organizations are doing really well. And what we talked about last time, so I don't want to go over it in too much detail, was that they're getting huge increases in donations from people who kind of come out of the woodwork during this type of political climate. And so they have, 3/4 of the people who are donating to them are new donors. And so it doesn't mean that we all as UUs can't support those groups as well, but we want to make sure we sustain what we have. And those groups, I think, are doing quite well in gathering a lot of new donations, because people want to make sure that the rights are upheld and
Right.
the values go forward. So our congregations are an important piece of keeping people safe spiritually and a good place to be and feel like they can be in community together. So we want to make sure that congregations think about that as well when they're figuring out how they're going to allocate their resources.
I think another positive way that we can talk about people who lower their pledge is that when you pledge to our congregations, you're playing with a net. And no one's going to come, report your credit isn't going to get ruined because you don't honor your pledge. You're not, you can lower your pledge at any time, even during the year. We make these in good faith, and circumstances change. And we let people know if they feel like they can make a stretch, and they can do that in good faith, that if their circumstances change, they just need to let us know. And sometimes I think people are willing to take a little bit more of a risk in good faith, knowing that. When they'll say, well, I don't know yet if such and such is going to happen. I'm afraid about this. I may need to support so-and-so. That's okay. If you can make a pledge in good faith, and your circumstances change, that's always a reason for coming back. And all that we ask is that you let us know, because we use that number in terms of planning. Any other questions or?
I'd like to ask if people have some successful strategies for convincing new friends or pledging or potentially prospective pledging start that conversation?
Okay, you kind of froze up there as you were asking the question. Was it about having members?
How to approach new members or prospective pledging friends about their first pledge and convincing them to annualize perhaps what they've been putting in the collection basket and giving it a number. But I'm interested in what other people do when they talk to someone who is pledging for the first time.
Okay, that in a lot of congregations that would be friends and not new members, because often the conversation with new members happens at the time of membership, and if you're not getting a pledge from people as they join the church, I think you're really missing a golden opportunity. And having that discussion, but particularly that idea of approaching people who, that they're coming, and I think, it does help us to have that number. I mean, I think you can speak to their generosity, right? Hey, we know you're contributing. We know you like what we're doing and whatever. Would you be willing to make that a commitment so we can plan and do that? Does anyone have specific strategies you're using around that? Or Kay, do you have something you want to add?
Well, so, I mean, again, to emphasize what you said about people joining and whether they're joining as a member or they're, some congregations now are having a specific path to being a friend in the church. And there's usually 1 to 4 sessions that you have to attend depending on the congregation and how they run it to do that. And so having stewardship be a piece of that and using what we already talked about, the suggested fair share giving guide as an educational piece is an important opportunity for that. So, I think that there's a variety of ways to approach it, but having a particular opportunity, some sort of gathering where you can talk to the person about it. And again, you can include that particular demographic in your annual budget drive, or you can send a specific letter with the guide, just talking about, we're, this is what we do with our funds to educate people. It's good to have the conversation in person if you can. In a group meeting, it feels sort of less threatening than if it's a one-on-one. If it's somebody new, although sometimes people are very receptive to having somebody meet with them one-on-one, as long as they know it's not going to be high pressure to get to know people better. So I think that
during our pledge drive, I was going to say that we have a lot of people who are friends, and one of the things that I make sure that I address is that they understand that they can pledge without becoming members, because a lot of people are friends on purpose. They don't want to be a member. They have bad experiences about joining churches. So I make sure that I talk with them and let them know, just because you pledge doesn't mean that you're a member. You can still be a friend, but support us. And I think that really opens up a lot. And then I get back to that this supports our budget so that we can plan. And it's very helpful if they can help with that. And they usually step right up. They really appreciate having that opening.
Right. Yeah, we had a special category that we started in Ventura of Pledging Friend, and we were very specific about what it meant, that you would be in the directory, you would be on the e-tree. I think we extended the same rental rates to Pledging Friends as we did to member. I mean, so there were certain things like that.
Yeah, we call them supporting friends.
Supporting friends, yeah, that's great. Often, like we would have people at our book group, someone who would extend the invitation to other people that came to the book group who didn't necessarily come to anything else at church, but they did that, or they came to the Sangha, or they, we knew that they were partaking of services to get an invitation from other people who say, our congregation supports this, and if you can see your way to pledging to support the congregation that's helping to support this activity, we we invite you to do so. We had someone in Ventura who never came into the church, who donated $1,000 a year because she liked the idea that her town had a beacon of liberal religion in her town. And I used her story a lot. And I think it was very motivating often to people and moving to people, that people that don't come here for anything want us to be here. And they know that they're still receiving from our good works. Is that Catherine said that we should, as part of our new member process, we do include a portion about time, talent, and treasure, and that we share what the annual budget is and what the average pledge is. And the new member group that comes in the spring, we clarify that the pledge they are making as part of becoming a member is only until the end of the fiscal year. Yes, for congregations that don't do year-round pledging, that's always a good thing to, clarify that it's just for a few months. And that's kind of confusing to people sometimes, too. Other thoughts or?
And I would invite, and if this is okay with you, Jan, to give us feedback about these types of calls. We're always trying to figure out how we can get stewardship information out to all of you and provide information. So this is a little bit different format than a webinar, but we want to, we try and encourage dialogue and have it be, we have talking points, but we also want it to also be an information sharing and as Jan said at the beginning, the wisdom of the whole group. And so several of you have shared several things that other congregations may find helpful or interesting as well. And so that's where we're going with this kind of format. So we'd love to hear how you like that, or don't, either way. And so we can, that helps us better serve you going forward and figure out what we want to do in the future.
And a couple of questions now have come up that we could take another hour on, but we won't. In a previous congregation, we had 40 people who continually pledged at the 0 level. These people had incomes but would not commit. Any ideas to motivate such people to make a pledge? I really think that it needs to be in the culture that is an expectation of members. It's in some of our bylaws that everyone will make a pledge. I mean, I could talk to you more offline about that, but I think that is an important expectation of membership, and that often when it has become that it's not, perhaps the best use of our time is changing the culture with new members. And the expectation is people are coming in. Someone says our bylaws state that a member must pledge. Also, how do you keep recognition from being classist, recognizing high-level donors? I think you can ask people to self-select in terms of if you feel like you're a generous donor and that you have a high commitment to this congregation, or that you're a stretch giver, or that you are giving a certain percentage of your income or plan to increase a percentage of your income. Percentage does not speak at all to the amount of money. Or you could do things within that fair share giving guide, because you can be in the same level with people that are giving a whole lot of money and a larger percentage, but across that thing, if you're a committed person, I think then you're recognizing that. So thank you for all of this and for your high level of participation. And it was good to be able to see those of you we could see and to see the names of those that we could not. If you didn't type in your congregation in the chat box, I would invite you to do that. I'm just wanting to let my colleagues know, congregations that they're working with, whether or not they had some representation here. I am grateful to each and every one of you. And for the work that you're doing that can often be very discouraging. And I hope you will take heart and feel yourself pulled into this work rather than pushed, and realize what an important gift that you are giving your congregation, that you are giving Unitarian Universalism, and that you're giving every member of your congregation in terms of encouraging generosity, which is a core religious value. And I will close tonight with these words from the Reverend Dr. Kendall Gibbons. We can understand the abundance of the universe in two ways: as an invitation to complacency or as an invitation to generosity. It is when we respond to the abundance of life with gratitude and generosity that we become part of that universal creativity. When we contribute our own energy to the flowing stream, then it fills us and pours out of us to others so that the stream is enhanced. May it be so for all of you and your lives. Thank you so much.
Thank you.